And suddenly, uneasily, she felt she had fallen into a trap. In the garden, a secret labour was being done that she was starting to perceive. On the trees, the fruits were black, sweet as honey. On the ground, there were dry seeds, full of circumvolutions, like little rotting brains. The bench was stained with purple juices. The waters rustled with intense softness. The luxurious legs of a spider were fastened to the tree trunk. The crudity of the world was restful, and death was not what we thought. Hello everybody and welcome to the third episode of Tales from the Quill. I'm so excited, I can't believe we've made it to 3 episodes of this monthly podcast where we delve into the lives and works of different authors. And from last episode you heard the wonderful Michael K. Vaughan talking about H.P. Lovecraft, and we have another special guest for you. I thought it would be rather nice to take some guests from around the BookTube community to speak about their favourite authors. And today we're going to be speaking about a Ukrainian-born Brazilian author with the wonderful Roz from Scallydandling About the Book. So please do check out her channel. All links and relevant information will, of course, be included in the description of this podcast. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy. So hi, Roz. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode today and coming in to talk about Chaya Pinkasivna Lispector, or Clarice Lispector.
Or Clarice, I believe.
Clarice. Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If they say Recife, can be Clarice. Clarice.
Yeah. Lovely to be here, Mark, and to talk about a writer that has become really important to me in recent years. So, yeah, very happy to do that. And as we speak, it's Women in Translation Month, so it's really nice to talk about a woman that I read in translation.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning more about her and of course her works. As you know, she's very, very new to me. I've known about her existence for probably a week. So,
where have you been the last few years?
You know me. I'm buried in 19th century.
Yes.
Uncool stuff.
Well, yeah, and as I say, to be fair, she's a writer that I've only come to relatively recently, but sometimes when you do literally find yourself thinking, why on earth had I not heard about this author before? But actually, I think now in 2023, she's probably a lot better known than she was a lot better known in the Anglophone world than she was even 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do, as we were talking before we pressed record, about the fact that back in 2009, some guy, Benjamin Moser, wrote a biography of her and then starts, really pushing her works and getting them retranslated, re-released. And that must have something, I think, to do with the fact that she's kind of being rediscovered.
Yeah.
Although, of course, in Brazil, she didn't need to be rediscovered at all, did she? So, indeed,
not that she was always given the kind of credit that she is now. She did sometimes share that experience that many women writers do of being slightly undervalued or underplayed, even though there have always been people that have said, she's one of Brazil's absolute greatest modern writers. And a queen of Brazilian literature. But yes, she hasn't always been sort of.
So, I mean, Brazil's a long way from Brighton or Bournemouth.
Brighton.
Well, I know that with the football as well. That's annoying, isn't it? Because I always confuse those two places, and it's ridiculous. And I said Brighton first.
You did. Yeah, and like the only thing that Bournemouth has over Brighton, Okay, is a sandy beach.
Well, who needs a sandy beach, eh?
When you've got
So,
Brighton.
whether it's the Copacabana beach of Brazil or the pier at Brighton, how on earth did you come to know Clarissa Lispector? I mean, how did she first come into your life?
Well, one thing that you know about me, Mark, that some of the people listening may know is that I have this particular enthusiasm for reading literature from other parts of the world than where I live, as it were, and I'm doing this read an author from every country of the world, sort of a long-term project, and I've been doing that for a while. And so I was interested in reading a woman author from Brazil, and someone mentioned Lispector to me and suggested it was BookTube that finally kind of like pushed me over the edge in discovering Lispector, because someone mentioned and suggested it to me they were talking about reading her, and I embarked on a buddy read. I think it was Mark Nash, who many of us know and love in the bookish sort of world, social media world, and I hope you're going to invite him sometime to come and do one of these.
It'd be interesting. I mean, he's an author himself. I suppose he could talk about himself, though. Of course, that doesn't fit my parameter of being deceased yet. So that would be a bit too creepy, I suppose.
Yeah, and he's very interested in death, but I think that would be a little creepy. Yes.
But yes.
So
it was a buddy read.
It was a BookTube buddy read that honed me in on reading. My first Lispector novel, which curiously actually was the last one that she wrote, and that was Hour of the Star, which was published like literally in the year that she died, and then she has one more that's published posthumously. But and it was February of 2019. And it was an absolute revelation. When you discover a new author and you're just knocked out by the quality of the writing and the unique quality, difference. It's like I have never read someone like this author before.
Interesting. And I mean, you mentioned, of course, reading from every country of the world, or trying to read from every country of the world. I don't know, to put you on the spot, how many have you done so far?
Oh, I've got 17 left to go out of 196. There's a few also almost countries that I'm also reading, but essentially 100 out of the 196. And I've got books lined up for 3 more countries, 2-3 more countries. And then I've got a rump of around 14, 15 that are going to be really hard. Little island nations and micro states. But I'll get them in the end.
And are you including some like overseas territories in that as well, or?
No, although I do think that if I'm stuck trying to get to those last, say, 14, I will read more of the almost countries. Places like Somaliland is on my list now. Not universally recognized, but Kosovo is another. I've already done sort of Kurdistan. All those places that are trying to be countries and not. And then more overseas territories as well, because particularly French-speaking ones. There's so many. France has a tendency to hang on to places surreptitiously, as does America, in fact. I should read something from Puerto Rico, shouldn't I?
Well, I think we've got, I don't know, we being the British, I think we've got maybe 13, something like that.
True.
So, but the reason I mention that as well is because with Clarissa, she's not Brazilian, really, is she?
Oh, that's interesting. Now, don't say that to a Brazilian. They will be deeply offended.
Well, not Brazilian born, shall I say, at least.
So yes, let's talk about that. And I think it's fair to say that a sort of coming from a migrant background is relevant to her writing. So I think that's fair. But an awful lot of Brazilians have, it's a nation that is made up of quite a mixture of indigenous and immigrant sort of people, isn't it? But both voluntary and involuntary. But yes, no, Clarice was born in sort of small place in what's now Ukraine, in the sort of southwest, so close to Poland and Moldova, you know, that area. Her family were Jewish. It was 1920, so, you know, chaos, famine, pogroms, and they fled into, I think, initially Romania, and then managed to take ship from Hamburg to Brazil. So, you know, very much the penniless migrant background. But she was only a baby. She was not yet 2 when she arrived in Brazil, and she was. Although I think they spoke Yiddish at home, her parents, nevertheless, she considered Brazilian Portuguese as her native tongue. You know, that's what she always spoke. Yeah. So yeah, Brazilian, but yes, from a European background.
Yeah, because I was surprised looking her up and seeing like how quickly her family changed their names. Like they literally changed their names on arrival. Now I've heard of this being done like when immigrants came to Ellis Island in America, and you know the immigration people either couldn't spell or couldn't be bothered or just changed the names themselves. But apparently this was a conscious decision. So Pincas becomes, I can't remember, I think like I had it earlier, wherever it was. He becomes Pedro.
Yes.
Her mother Mania becomes Marietta. Her sister Leia becomes Alyssa, and Chaya, which is Clarice, of course, becomes Clarice. It's just her older sister,
Tanya.
Tanya, who keeps the same name, yeah,
because they obviously felt that sounded, you know, it worked in Portuguese, didn't it?
Yeah. But it's cool. I mean, it's actually a very cool name, Lispector. It's not. I don't even really know. I don't know if I've ever come across it before, and it just I don't know if it has any meaning or what, but it's pretty cool.
I've never looked it up, actually. Yes, I associate it so firmly with her that I have. Yes, I suppose. I wonder if there are Lispectors in Ukraine still, or that, you know, those neighbouring areas of Poland and Moldova. I wonder.
It's probably unlikely, unfortunately, I guess, given, of course, what happens between her leaving Ukraine and you know and whatnot. But so obviously they have the name changes. They try to you know, they settle down to life there. They're living in Recife.
So in the northeast, not in the most sort of prosperous part of Brazil, and her father, who's a very sort of educated man, but he's sort of, I think he's sort of trading rags initially, and then becomes a merchant, and but he's just very focused on giving his family a some sort of life, and really enthusiastic about his daughter's education. And isn't that interesting? You see that in the lives of women writers sometimes, that there's a key parent, one or the other, can be either that just says, at a time when women's education wasn't necessarily such a priority, just takes the view that no, education is your way out of the difficult situation we're in, and we should really go for it. And I'm going to really support you to do that.
And I think, unfortunately, though, in Clarice's case, it's circumstances intervene that mean that it is, of course, her father that becomes the parent that does this.
Yeah.
It's her mother.
I mean, it seems like, and it seems like her mother was injured by their bad things that happened to them, at the time they were fleeing Ukraine. There's a sort of persistent story that she was raped. There's actually no firm historical evidence for that, but certainly she was, disabled and frail, and she died when Clarice was 9. So,
Well, Wikipedia gives it as a mystery illness, I think. But
yeah,
something else I read suggested it was possibly syphilis brought on through being raped.
yeah.
And then something else I read suggested that Clarissa's birth
Ah,
was to do with some kind of folk belief that pregnancy and giving birth could be a kind of cure for syphilis. I don't know. The
I'm,
thing
I'm,
is,
I'm skeptical in a way, because I think one of the things about Lispector's writing is that it is so kind of odd and exceptional. So
mhm,
I think then people want to put things into her family history and background to kind of explain that, so almost people are looking for something, a little added layer of drama. And I'm not sure you need more drama than being fleeing pogroms and arriving in a new country, having to learn the language and having not a penny to your name, and that might be enough.
well, I mean, yeah. The thing is, as well. I mean, it really was chaotic. It wasn't just, of course, the pogroms. You've got the Russian Civil War is ongoing. At the end
Yes.
of the First World War, you have even the Polish wars and stuff against Ukraine and all this kind of stuff. Even at that point, part of Ukraine was part of Czechoslovakia as well. So there are a lot of things that would have made it perfectly understandable why they had to leave.
Yes.
So she loses her mum. She's 9 years old, and
Yeah.
that's got to be very difficult, of course. But as you say, her father encourages her education. She ends
And
up
she's
going.
obviously really got the smarts, hasn't she?
Mm,
The
mhm,
impression you have is she was a very bright little girl. Yeah. She's the sort that, and she says that she knew she wanted to write from the age of about 11.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, she goes to the Hebrew Yiddish Brazilian college.
Yeah.
She ends up in what in Europe, I guess we call a gymnasium or a grammar school, basically.
Yes.
She's heavily influenced by the likes of Dostoevsky and Hermann Hesse, especially.
Yes.
So these kind of things really push that desire to write. And of course, perhaps somewhat unusually, she goes on to university.
Yeah. Well, they moved to Rio when she was in her teens,
Yeah.
and apparently because her father thought it would offer his daughters more opportunities, for a better future. And yes, and then she gets into the law school, a very prestigious part of the university there. So although she doesn't, it doesn't sound like she loved law. It sounds like it was like, um it offered opportunities, but writing was what she wanted to do, and she was already working as a journalist when she was a student. So, yeah.
And of course, she publishes her first
Yeah,
novel while she's at university.
yeah,
I think she's only 23. I mean, that
yeah,
is pretty young.
yeah. And her she, in fact, she publishes her first short story when she's 20, or 19 even, I think. And at that same year her father dies, so
Yeah.
she's fully orphaned in 1940. So by the time she's 20, she's a student. She's a just published writer, and no parents. So not an easy start.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't see really how. There's not a lot of information online. Maybe, of course, in Moses' biography, but about the relationship between the sisters, whether or not they, because she's the youngest. So, do they support her? How is she? Do you know anything in your readings whether or
Yes.
not?
Yes. I mean, I haven't read Moses' biography. I, I haven't, because I very rarely read biographies of authors that I really love,
Mhm.
um, because I always feel it's risk. There's like almost like and especially not autobiographies, but because there's always that risk that somehow I'll lose my love for them in finding out too much about them. That sounds odd, doesn't it? There we go. So no, I haven't read his biography, although apparently it is very good. But my understanding is that no, she was very close to her sisters, and one of the we'll go on, I think, to talk about her, her life as a diplomat's wife. But one of the things, she was corresponding with her sisters all the time, and when she came back to Brazil, she would see them, and she missed them a lot. So I think that the impression one has is that the three of them were pretty close, and relied on.
That's nice to know, especially when she loses both parents so young. I mean, basically within 10 years, I suppose, of each other. And it's quite sad as well, because it was actually just a botched operation, wasn't it?
Yeah.
She loses her father. He went for some gallbladder operation. It was botched, and he passed away. So yeah. We mentioned that. While she's at university, she publishes her first novel after having already written for a good few years short stories, dabbled in journalism. And the first novel is Near to the Wild Heart.
Yeah. It, interestingly, for me at the time when she was writing it, so she was being a student, she was being a journalist. She also had apparently a sort of a setback in love, as it were, which because she sort of fell in love with the poet and novelist Lucio Cardoso, but he's gay, and apparently that was, it was like another loss, I suppose. Although they became really close friends and remained really close friends, but so she loses both parents, and then she is sort of disappointed in what she thought was going to be a great love, and she'd misunderstood.
And is that seen in the writing?
I would say so. Yes, absolutely. And I'm someone who resists explaining what writers of fiction put in their books by experiences from their life. But in a way, I don't think you can get away from that altogether with respect to, because her writing feels so personal, not autobiographical, but personal. So yes, I think that a sort of experience of a broken heart is probably really important in her writing. And that first book, Near to the Wild Heart, which she was published in 1943, just after she married, in fact. So we should talk about that in a sec. But it is a book about a young woman, it's about an adolescent girl and then moving into womanhood. And in fact, it follows her from her childhood, sort of, it's a Bildungsroman, I suppose, yes, of Joanna and her marriage, and how all those sort of dilemmas about self-knowledge and self-enlightenment and choices as a girl and a woman, and feeling that you're different and maybe special.
I mean, from what I understand, though, this kind of thing is a big thing throughout her works anyway, the whole human experience, and as you say, this kind of thing, which I'm sure we'll come on to. You mentioned the fact that this was published just after she got married, so she wasn't broken-hearted for too long. Not for too long,
you see, I think there's different views about that, because there's a slight perhaps hint that it's sort of like she there's an element of she's disappointed in one and goes for somebody she's known as a fellow student, somebody who's from a sort of good Catholic family, so getting away from the sort of uncertainty of her immigrant background, someone who's just been been accepted into the foreign service, for the equivalent of the Foreign Office, so he's going to be a diplomat, so there's a bit of she is still, because she's only 22.
Element of rebound, maybe. some kind of rebound plus some kind of settled known quantity, perhaps.
Choosing a bit of security at that point,
Well, she needs it, I think.
which she probably needed, but maybe she then slightly comes to regret. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I didn't realize when you said that her husband, what's his name, Mari Gurgel Valente.
Yes.
You mentioned he came from a strong Catholic family, and it's interesting because one of the things I read was part of the reason they moved to Rio de Janeiro while the father was still alive was in the hope that she would find a nice Jewish boy to marry.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, do you know? I mean, if she goes off and marries a Catholic, that whether or not, I guess, the whole Jewish thing or even the religion thing in general is of any consequence to her? Do you know?
I would say that a sort of spiritual quality and that almost the existential quest for a higher power, God, whatever is, and a degree of sort of mysticism, probably influenced by Jewish mysticism, all of that is very much in her writer, but she is not, she's, not denominational. She opts not to be Jewish or Catholic, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because I was wondering that. So, as you say, he works for the Foreign Service. Now, she has to overcome a small hurdle in order to marry him, though.
Yes, she has to naturalize. Yeah.
I noticed she didn't have to convert, though, which surprised me.
Yeah.
But she does have to naturalize. She does have to become a Brazilian citizen. And 11 days after she becomes one, she marries this Gurgel fella. And I suppose he is kind of her, as you say, ticket to some form of security. But there's not much in terms of being settled, though, while she's married to him. Because he's in the Foreign Service, they embark on all sorts of adventures.
Yeah. First they go up to the sort of Amazonian part of Brazil, and then they're off to Naples. Naples in 1944. So, in the throes of World War II. And for someone of a Jewish background, interesting, to say the least, to be in Italy in 1944. And she does actually sort of, and I didn't even know till I read about her that there was a Brazilian expeditionary force there fighting on behalf of the Allies. Who knew? I mean, people, obviously World War II historians did, and Brazilians, but I didn't.
Well, I think people often forget just to what degree it really was a world war.
Yeah.
In terms of how many countries do get involved.
Yeah.
And as well, a lot of I can't remember off the top of my head when Brazil comes in, but there are a whole spate of countries that do come in pretty much when it's getting wrapped up. I mean, by the time she gets to Naples, it's not fascist Italy anymore. Yeah, you've got, they've moved. The Germans they've moved up north. Yeah, so I mean, she doesn't know if they can come back, but the Allies have already invaded, southern Italy. So it does have that bit of security. But as you say, she gets involved, doesn't she, with the helping out with the
injured Brazilian troops and so on. Yeah, so interesting early married life. I'd say, but at the same time, she's writing.
Yeah,
and that's one of the striking things about her. Her throughout her life, and it always interesting as a woman writer. She's she's following her husband around for her job, and she goes on to babies, and having to be a diplomat's wife. She never stops writing, even if there's periods when she isn't getting published. Yeah. So that was when she was writing The Chandelier, her second novel, which it was published in 1946, but she was writing it sort of through, as far as we understand, sort of 44 and 45. Yeah. And then
she also gets Near to the Wild Heart actually gets translated probably for the first time into Italian, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, any language, I imagine, but by some poet that she meets. So that's interesting, and they become good friends. There's no suggestion that there's anything more. Again, there might be in of course, the biography. But it's always easy to just assume there's more than friendship, right? So when these kind of people,
indeed, and both those two novels were highly acclaimed, critically acclaimed. Which is worth saying. This was, she was immediately, and early on recognised as a really important, innovative new voice in sort of Brazilian literature. At that point in the 1940s.
Well, that's the important thing as well. She is new. I mean, at least as far as Brazilian literature goes, she is something that is completely brand new, very modern, and hasn't been seen before.
And what is interesting is people assume that she's been influenced by modernists like Joyce and Woolf. And she very firmly turned around and said that she hadn't read either of them before she wrote her first couple of books. So who knows? But she certainly claimed.
Well, it's interesting. Of course, you mentioned Woolf because she's often compared to her.
The famous quote. Give us the famous quote.
Looks like Marlene Dietrich and writes like Virginia Woolf. She didn't like that, though, did she?
Well, what woman likes to be defined by what other women she's like?
Well, of course, it's the men doing the defining, which I think she has an issue with there. Quite rightly, of course. So.
Quite rightly, but it does for anyone who's not familiar with her. It is not a bad summary. She's a very strikingly beautiful woman in an unusual way, and she had a kind of unusual look. And yes, if I love Lispector, I'm sure one of the reasons why I love Lispector is because I'd previously read and loved Virginia Woolf. Not that I feel that they're the same or that she was influenced, but just it's like if you're someone if you're someone who can enjoy reading Woolf, Lispector is, a good author to move on to.
Well, Woolf is often thought of as being one of those, in inverted commas, hard authors, isn't it? Difficult authors to read by some people. And it's interesting because someone actually brought this up regarding Lispector herself, didn't they? They said to her, you are like a difficult author. And she was really surprised by it. Yeah. She was like, what do you mean? I write children's books, which we'll probably talk about in a bit. But she did write books for children as well, you see. So, it's,
and I think that if you read her novels, you get a slightly different Lispector than you get in her short stories, and no doubt, although I haven't read them, in her children's books and in her journalism. So it's like she almost saves her most extreme adventures in writing for her novels. Yeah, I think that
so.
Yeah, so poor old Clarice, what happens to her then? She gets moved to Switzerland to burn with her husband. And oh no, this apparently she was bored to tears with Switzerland. Now, there may be Swiss people out there, okay, listening to this, but I've been to Switzerland. It's very beautiful, but I do understand the concept of a Brazilian being bored in Switzerland.
Yeah. There's a thing in front of me here where it says it was a time of considerable boredom and frustration. She was often depressed, and when writing to her sister, she said, "This Switzerland." Sister Tanya. So I guess they're obviously in touch. This Switzerland is a cemetery of sensations.
Yes, I mean, unless you're doing downhill skiing, I think that's about right.
But something happens in Switzerland, which I guess, of course, is a nice thing for her.
Oh, she has a baby.
She has a baby.
Yeah, she has a son. Yeah, her first son.
Pedro.
But also, she brings out her third novel.
She does indeed. She does indeed.
I think that it may have been sort of already written when she moved, but yeah, it got published sort of around the same time. I think it was published in 1949, so just after her son was born. But I think she had already, she was writing it when she first moved and when she was pregnant. That's one of her books that I haven't read. So it's I've read most of her novels, but there's a couple that I haven't, and that one I'm waiting to get to. It hasn't it didn't sort of call to me as fast as some of the others, but she's one of those rare writers for me where I've got a kind of a completist urge, where I feel like I will end up reading everything she's written. Yeah, or certainly all the novels.
I mean, it's nice that her son is named after her father.
Yes.
Well, even with his Portuguese name, I suppose, he's not named.
Yeah.
But what I was going to ask you, I mean, looking through, as I say, I haven't read any of her novels. I mentioned I only read the first 3 stories or so from her collected stories. But, she's living in all these different places. She's living in Italy. She's living in Switzerland. And yet she's still writing these stories or writing these books, and they're all set in Brazil.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have any kind of... I don't know if it happens later on with any other novels, or whether they're all set firmly in Brazil. But it is interesting that it doesn't seem like she's inspired to set something...
Certainly not in Switzerland.
Certainly not in Switzerland, yeah. Maybe it's too boring to not write anything about it.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, they do go back and visit Brazil, but I mean, because they live out of the country for, when do they go? They go in, is it 44? And she moves back in 1959, which we'll come to. So, for 15 years, but so apart from visits, it's 15 years of kind of like exile from her country. And yes, all the novels that she writes then, and the short stories, she's not looking to set them in Europe. It's not that she doesn't. I'm sure she develops ideas and experiences and her languages and so on while she's living in Europe, but she doesn't embrace well, and her novels are so, as I say, I think it comes back to this personal thing, and and her novels are some of them are so interior, and that I'm not sure it would occur to her to set something in somewhere other than the country of her birth and the country that she loves. Yeah, but I may be wrong. But no, they're all set there.
So she goes back to Brazil for a bit. They spend almost a year there, and then her husband gets posted as a kind of trade delegate to England.
Yes.
And they spend about 6 months in England, which apparently she likes, although she does unfortunately suffer a miscarriage while she's there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then, of course, they head back to...
we're happy to say this just seems to be more positive about England than Switzerland.
Yeah.
But maybe it was just a more cheerful time in her life. You don't really know,
Yeah, I mean, she was down in the West Country. So,
yeah, she was in Torquay, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yes, hints of Agatha Christie.
I wonder if she stayed at Fawlty Towers.
Yeah.
On the English Riviera.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, they go back to Brazil again. And, of course, by 1952, they move to the US of A.
I'm just going to take us back one step just to say that one thing she did say about living in Switzerland, and so this is I suppose, the European experience, is she did find it interesting living somewhere with that longer history. So in all the cities in Brazil are in European terms relatively new, whereas somewhere like Bern, it's like, she said she talked about like the best thing for her there was like living in the Middle Ages, that and that did influence The Besieged City, that book. So, because I think, quite often the places she writes are sort of not entirely, some of them are quite literal, but others, in a sense, they're somewhere between fiction and reality. So, yeah, but as I say, because I haven't yet read The Besieged City, I can't say for sure, but it may have a slightly more European sort of atmosphere. Yeah.
Well, you see, the thing
Anyway,
with Prestige City, it didn't seem like it was super positively received, though. I
no,
mean, she's done
no,
really well with the first two novels. Then this one,
yeah.
it's not that great. And then, of course, I mean, we'll come back to her life in a bit,
Mm.
but that does impact, I think, on a couple of her later works. I mean, I think that the next one, Apple in the Dark, she even finds it difficult to get a publisher.
Oh,
So it just
yeah.
shows the fickle nature of the publishing industry. She has one book that's like not quite on it, and
Yeah. But also, I imagine being out of the country, you're not, like you're not networking with other writers and the publishing world, and so you're at
that's true, isn't it?
advantage.
That's true.
Yeah,
I mean, it must be weird to try and
yeah,
write books for your national market and not actually living there and
yeah,
not dealing with it. I
yeah.
mean, it's something I suppose we don't really think of. But she's in Washington. The family moved to Washington, Washington D.C.
Oh,
They live in Maryland, and there, of course, her second son, Paolo, is born. But she's not overly enthused with life in America.
She writes about it, the life of a diplomat's wife in America, and I'll do the quote this time. She writes later and said, "I hated it, but I did what I had to do. I gave dinner parties, I did everything you're supposed to do, but with a disgust." And that's quite a strong way to describe, your feeling about having to take on that life. And her sisters, like said that she would never, she did the job, but she never really wanted to be conventional about it. She didn't fully embrace it, I suppose.
Well, because I mean, it also fits in with the idea that she didn't for a long while, and probably during this period as well, doesn't consider herself to be a professional author. She is basically, I think, even how she's viewed or in her mind at this time, she's a housewife who has a hobby writing books.
Yeah. Although she as I say, she never stops writing short stories. She's always seems to be working on a novel. She's also doing bits of journalism. She's sending newspaper columns back, but she's trying to keep all that live. And I suppose the good thing about being a diplomat's wife is, what's the famous quote about, it's the baby in the pram in the hallway is the, ruin of a woman author. Obviously she will always have had help. She won't have had to do all the domestic stuff. But on the other hand, as a diplomat's wife, you are expected to take a certain role in terms of,
hostessing or hostessing or hosting. Yes. I don't know what I can say these days. Hosting, there we go. That's probably better, isn't it?
Yeah, hospitality maybe, or
hospitality,
something. But and she does, and she is one of the great writers of the female mind and the female experience, and she writes about every age of woman, from girl through to sort of middle age, and she does write really interestingly from the perspective of the sort of the relatively comfortably off housewife. That is one of the women that she inhabits in her writing, which is not a kind of I don't know, apparently glamorous thing to write about, although she does it with her own in a very distinctive way.
Does that limit her appeal? The fact that she is so, as you say, so adept at writing the different stages of womanhood, so that men can read her, but they're not going to get the same thing out of it because it's not something, of course, they can relate to, is it?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, when I've buddy read The Spectre, I've done that with, I said, Mark Nash, also with Alan of Big Hard Books and Classics, also with Una of Codex Cantina. So all men. I've and they've all got loads out of it. So, you know, as I say, coincidentally, I've experienced the male reader's experience of reading The Spectre. And I think, you know, sometimes we really value the opportunity to get inside the mind of someone different from ourselves. And, you know, if we want to get inside a female mind, yeah, The Spectre's one of the routes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So they're in America for around, I think, 7 years or so, just under 7 years, and things change, don't they?
Yeah. And she's definitely more and more unhappy in her marriage, and it just, I mean, you know, I'm not inside her head, but you know, as far as we know, she was frustrated and unhappy, and ultimately she up sticks and heads back to Brazil. Yeah. And
With Pedro and Paolo.
With Pedro and Paolo, indeed. Indeed. So 1959, yeah, she leaves him, leaves old Maori, and which must have been a pretty shocking thing to do in 1959. I mean, I think to an extent that, you know, it was probably presented as, you know, going back to Brazil for a break. You know, you can imagine how you'd kind of deal with it at the time, and they don't actually get sort of divorced as such for another decade, I think. But you know, big deal to walk out.
Well, I think part of it, though, I mean, because they've got the two boys, that does provide a good excuse for returning to one's own country, because education, schooling, however good, of course, it could be in America, they might want their children educated in Brazil. Yeah, so that does provide some cover. But yeah, I mean, it must have been a big thing, but then probably not wholly surprising, as you said, because of her feelings of towards Cardoso and stuff, and it was maybe that she settled with this guy because he happened to come along at the right time, maybe, and yeah, perhaps it isn't a big surprise that this happens. So you know, the sad thing. Sorry, go on.
Well, and I think, though, again, you know, I really, you know, I'm always wary of, you know, making assumptions about writers and so on. But, you know, one has the impression that she may have experienced depression off and on in her life, and, you know, so, and
well,
so she may.
She does have this, certainly has this experience of depression, as you say. I mean, because if going back to that quotation about Virginia Woolf, you know, she has issue with it because of the way she envisages Virginia, or believes Virginia Woolf handled her own depression, and that by taking her own life. Whereas, as you said to me before we started recording, that, you know, her attitude was very much, you know, whatever life throws at you, you've just got to carry on. You know.
And she saw Woolf as having, you know, given up and opted out, and, you know, and we, you know, with our, you know, better understanding of mental health, you know, might think that's quite a cruel thing to think about Woolf, who had, you know, carried on through years of very painful mental health, and, you know, kept writing and kept, you know, getting, you know, was surviving, and then you know, there's a day when you don't, and, you know, but certainly it's not a sort of a Catholic disapproval of suicide or whatever. It's a more sort of moral sense of you don't give up, you put up with things and you keep going.
So the next two books, Family Ties, Apple in the Dark. There's problems, aren't there? Problems in you know, financially for her.
She's really,
publisher.
yeah, she's struggling, and people don't, she hasn't got a publisher, and and Apple in the Dark. She apparently started writing when they were living in England. It's been brewing for some time, and so it's hard for her at this point to so this idea that she was always celebrated in Brazil, as you
Well,
say.
it's 5 years. I mean, it's 5 years between her finishing Apple in the Dark and actually getting it published, which is probably quite a long
Yes.
time.
Yeah.
Considering she does have a couple of big successes under her belt, that is.
So she gets some of her short stories have been coming out sort of in the meantime, and she gets, and then so a notable short story collection published in 1960, and then it seems like that was the facilitated Apple in the Dark being published in 1961. I haven't read the Apple in the Dark. Whereas The Besieged City is perhaps her least liked book. I think the reason that I haven't yet read The Apple in the Dark, although I will, is that it's the one with a male protagonist. Now, actually, now I think about it, perhaps that's a reason to read it and see what she does with a male protagonist. But all her other books are essentially, it's not they don't have major male characters, and that we're not sometimes following their thoughts and experiences, but it's the only one she writes where the central character is a man, and a wonderfully weird one, because he believes he's killed his wife and sort of flees to the backlands of Brazil, believing he's killed his life, but it's killed his wife. It was considered best novel of the year in Brazil, so it was well recognized. She also has a love affair around this time, apparently, but with a married man, another writer, poet, again, Paulo Mendes Campos. Brief as far as we know, but but she's moving into a period of what I would see as her peak artistic sort of production, because the next novel she publishes in 1964 is A Passion According to G.H. and that is one of her, because she has a limited number of novels, I suppose, there's probably about half of them you'd see as her top works, but The Passion According to G.H. is a really extraordinary book. It's a book with a plot, but the plot of it is, and there's no embarrassment about spoilers about this plot. The plot is, there's this kind of well-off woman living in a flat, and her maid has left, and she goes in to sort out the maid's room and finds that the maid has drawn some really weird kind of like figures on the wall. And she sits down on the bed and she sees a cockroach in the empty wardrobe, squishes the cockroach, kind of goes off on a bit of a fever dream, eats some of the sort of sticky white stuff that's come out of the cockroach, and has a bit of a sort of a mystical and spiritual epiphany. There you go. And that's
Kafka-esque, isn't it? I
mean, it is. Yeah, it's the one that people say, oh, that's really. It isn't Kafka-esque. I mean, it is and it isn't. I think that sort of that diminishes both Kafka and her, because it's so different. But
I did read a quote that said she was the most important Jewish author since Kafka or something.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
It was in my mind. But so she publishes this book, and then she does have a few more successes in it, but she suffers a terrible accident.
Disaster. Yeah, she and it's interesting, one wonders how well she was in herself at the time, but apparently she took a sleeping pill, fell asleep with a cigarette in her hand, and set fire to herself in her bed, and was badly burnt to the extent of permanent damage, losing more or less having a hand amputated, damaged her legs, and we know that the rest of her life she was in pain, and it affected her sort of movement and mobility and so on. So a major life event, in 1966. She actually
Does it affect her writing to the point where it's noticeable, or because you said she's heading towards this great period, so after the books, we won't go through them individually because I don't want to keep you super long, but after The Passion According to GH, we have a few more, such as the woman who killed Fish, An Apprentice, or Book of Pleasures, then with Covert Joy, Where Were You at Night?
Some of these are children's books,
right,
and collections of short stories, and I think so. There's an element of needing to publish some things for the income, but The Apprenticeship or the Book of Pleasures is another, pretty extraordinary book, slightly more accessible, and there's a slight. It's the nearest she writes to a love story, except it isn't, but you get the feeling that she was perhaps trying, after the weirdness of Passion According to GH, to publish some, you get the feeling maybe that her publisher might have said to her, could you give us something that would be slightly easier to sell, and she does. But then in 1973 she brings out Agua Viva, which is my personal favorite of all her books, and is as experimental as anything that she's written and anything you could care to read. What is interesting, though, when you say what impact did the accident have on her writing, is that she acquires a kind of a friend and assistant, Olga Borelli, who is an ex-nun, and really in very practical ways supports her so that she can continue to write. So an important figure. But Agua Viva is a knockout book. It's in my, if you forced me to say, Ros, what are your top 10 books ever? Agua Viva is up there.
It's interesting. I was expecting you to say like my top books from her, but it's actually one of the top 10 books ever. Well, that's great.
It really doesn't have a plot at all. It's an artist just thinking about things, and sort of it's got a kind of sensual, spiritual, mystical element. It's about the meaning of life, and and is there a higher power, and what are we here for, and what is art, but not in a pretentious way. It's like a kind of, it's sort of stream of consciousness, but it's playing with language and images, and it's like an abstract painting. That's how I describe it. Yeah, the closest you come to a really good abstract painting in words, or bits of it like.
And is that the one you would recommend the people listening to this to start with?
No, no, I wouldn't. I'd start with either her first or her last book. So I'd start with either Near to the Wild Heart or The Hour of the Star, which was the last book that was published in her lifetime. But then move on to The Passion and Agua Viva, I would say, and then do also read The Chandelier and The Apprenticeship. But those would be my top four, and a sort of approximate reading order, as it were.
You mentioned the need of her to write, of course, to earn money, because she's now a single mother, I guess. She continues with her journalism. Strangely,
she's working as a translator as well.
I didn't know that, and that was one of the things I wondered, was whether she spoke English, and I'm guessing she obviously did, seeing as she translated Oscar Wilde, Edgar Allan Poe, and Agatha Christie, among others, which has been really interesting.
She did live in both England and America. She lived in the States. True. That's true. They were there for 7 years, so she was fluent.
She would have done, of course, but she turns to translation because she loses her job as a journalist, so which is a shame. You mentioned the last book, The Hour of the Star, and it is published in the year of her death, and that's 1977. So we can
Yes,
already see she's born 1920, dies 1977. She's too young.
too young.
And why does she die?
Ovarian cancer. Yeah. Which is one of those things that carries women off early, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And what a loss. And you do wonder what else, she could have produced if she'd lived longer. There's a book that was published posthumously, A Breath of Life. It's a bit patchy apparently because she hadn't had a chance to, do the work that she would have done on it before publication. But sadly cut short. Yeah.
Well, it surprised me. I don't know whether it's just something of the time, but when they said that, she was actually taken to hospital, she was diagnosed with this inoperable disease, but she wasn't told about it.
No. But if you bear in mind that she was living with chronic pain, I suspect that it was very much in its latter stages by the time it was identified. So it's perhaps not as surprising as it appears. Yeah.
And then lastly, she's actually buried in the Jewish cemetery. So I don't know what that means, whether it's a cultural Jewish thing or whether in the last moments she got a bit religious. We don't know.
Or her sister's choice,
Could be, yeah, that's true. Because
being buried is about what your family needs. You're dead.
That's true. That's true. She wouldn't have cared. And for all we know, her sisters may well have married good Jewish boys like the father wanted as well. So they might have been.
Yes, indeed. I don't know.
So there we have it.
Yes. And what an interesting woman. And a woman who, where you're saying, might she have wanted to be it? She was someone that always rejected labels.
Mm-hmm.
So she rejected the label Jewish, not in a anti-Jewish way, but she just didn't want to be defined by that. She I consider her a very feminist writer, but she said she rejected that label too. Whatever label you want to hang on of her in her lifetime, certainly she pushed it away.
Yeah. Such as Marlene Dietrich and Virginia Woolf, right?
Yeah. And she and I think that's fair because I think she's very much one of a kind. Yeah, she had her political side. She did oppose, when the Brazilian sort of government was becoming more and more of an oppressive military dictatorship. She did speak up about that, and her last published book, published in her lifetime, The Hour of the Star, is probably her most political. It is exploring the lives of sort of the lower classes and that sort of social and economic oppression and combined with the patriarchy, so which is why it's not a bad one to start with. And apparently Brazilian school children, that's the one that is sort of on their syllabus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the most Brazilians know, they do that one at school.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously very well thought of there. I mean, I did notice you can see a nice picture of a statue of her online at the Copacabana beach, and it's interesting because there's a dog sitting next to her looking up, and I did wonder if it's her dog or not, but I wasn't able to find out. So there we have it. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because I say I knew nothing about her. I haven't, read only three first stories in the collector's stories.
What did you make of them?
Different, I can't say. It's very difficult because I think this her complete stories. So it was a mistake on my part probably to read the first three because they're the first three she wrote.
Yeah.
And
almost her juvenilia, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
While good, I wasn't, of course, blown away. But then, I will try one of the two you mentioned because she is an interesting character, and I think deserves deserves to be given the chance in my reading, in my TBR. Pop her in there.
Yeah, but she is, I'm absolutely passionate about her, and I think people who read her and love her are passionate about her. She's not she's not an author that people are sort of neutral about. I think you would either start reading one of her books and toss it across the room, or become, besotted. She has this sort of dangerous glamour almost. There's a lovely quote that one of her friends said about her writing. I must find it. Give me a moment to find it. You have to cut the moment when I'm searching for it. Yeah. One of her friends was talking to someone who was going to read one of her books and said, "It's not literature, it's witchcraft." And I think that's fair. So I'm cautious about who I recommend her to. She's not a writer that I would say, when you say, "Oh, anyone could enjoy this," or "Do read this. There's something in it for everybody." No, she's a writer. I would say, yeah, I'm going to get all pretentious. She's a writer for connoisseurs. There you go.
There you go. And has she, just before we finish up, has she left a legacy, do you know, on the Brazil literary scene? Are there people who follow her new style, as it were, or how did she leave Brazilian literature?
That's really interesting. Yes, in that Brazil does have, and I should have looked up a few names because I'm no good at keeping names in my head. But, we can do that. But Brazil has some really striking women writers of fiction, and I think that you could say, no, it's not that other people seek to write like Lispector, because nobody would, but she gives writers permission to write in their own unique voice and way. Hilda Hilst would be Hilda Hilst would be an example of a writer who is I don't love her in the way that I love Lispector, but she's the sort of author that Brazil has produced because there's a sort of Lispector helped establish a sort of tradition of perhaps for experimental literature in Brazil.
Wonderful. There we go. So, Ros, thank you so very much for joining me on this and coming on this journey through Lispector's life and works. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Oh, very much so. Thank you for having me, Mark. And I'm always happy to have an opportunity to enthuse about an author that I love as much as Lispector.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, Ros. And there we have it. What a wonderful conversation that was. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thoroughly enjoyed learning about an author I knew very little about and will certainly be tempted to look into in the future. So once again, I'd like to thank Ros for coming on and talking about Clarice Lispector. And please, as I say, do check out her channel. All relevant information is included in the show notes. And I want to thank you for listening. It's much appreciated. Do take care, everybody. Until next time. Bye-bye.